shadow on the moon at night, filling your dreams to the brim with fright.
University ghost stories are practically tradition here. Pair a love of ghost stories with a school's long and sometimes painful history, and you get some more site-specific folklore. A popular story centers on an unnamed new teacher from the University of the Philippines. She's hard at work, grading papers, and before she knows it, hours have passed, and she's the only one left in the building. Even worse, it's monsoon season, and a harsh storm drenches everything in rain. The teacher huddles inside a waiting shed by the school gate. There, she asks the lone security guard for help in calling a taxi. The roads are deserted, save for the rising floodwater. The security guard agrees to help. She asks if she can wait inside the nearest building, and while he's hesitant, he eventually gives in. But this school is old, and our young teacher is only new, so she barely recognizes the rooms after they've been closed down. The guard unlocks an old classroom, hands her the key and tells her to wait inside.
Lock the door and wait inside, he says. When a taxi arrives, I'll come back for you. I'll knock 3 times and call your name. Don't open the door for anyone else.
The teacher laughs. What's the point in locking the door? Who else will come here? But the guard insists. So she gives in, agrees, and the guard leaves after she locks the door. The teacher waits inside, slowly wiping herself and all of her stuff dry. The storm rages on outside, loud against the windows. The rest of the building is quiet as expected, until she hears it. Footsteps. The footsteps grow louder, signaling a fast approach. Eventually they stop right in front of her door. Someone knocks 3 times. The teacher gets up, thinking it's the guard. That was fast, she thinks. But something doesn't feel right. The shadow beneath the door stands still, unmoving. Didn't the guard say he was going to call her name too? Feeling anxious, the teacher peeks into the keyhole, but she can't see anything except pure red, as if something has covered the lock. Confused, she shrugs it off and walks back to her chair. Minutes later, another pair of footsteps approaches. This time, 3 knocks sound at the door. The guard calls her name and introduces himself. When the teacher unlocks the door, she finds him outside, telling her that he's found a taxi. They walk to the gate together. The taxi idles by the waiting shed, the only vehicle on the empty street. When the teacher hands the key back to the guard, she asks why he insisted on her locking the door.
There's a ghost that roams the halls, he explains. You know it's her, because she has purely red eyes.
I have had several paranormal experiences in my life, and these aren't as sexy as some of the stories, but these are all 100% true experiences. I'm in my 40s now, but my first experience was when I was 5 years old in the Philippines. My father was a military man and my mother was a native, and we lived off base for the entire time that we were there, surrounded by my mother's family. My aunts and uncles all helped out raising me and my cousins. The Philippines back then was full of mysticism, folklore, and occult, and my mother would tell me stories about the aswang, the white lady, and many more. But one night, when I was sleeping in my bed with my aunt, I woke up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. I looked up on the far wall and saw it. It was a huge mouth, or rather a shadow of a mouth, if that makes any sense to you. It kept opening and closing, but made no sound whatsoever. and like any young child, I used the only protection known to us. I hid under the covers. I kept looking out and it was still there, and my aunt didn't wake up at all, and I think that I eventually fell asleep. In the morning, it was gone. My mom believes it was a tikbalang playing with me, and all I know is that I can remember it to this day. Another thing that happened in the Philippines was that every full moon, something would run across our house in 3 leaps. Our house was long and a single story, but had the crappy roof that a country with loose building codes have. Every full moon, we would hear 3 booms across our roof. My father is a Vietnam veteran and a 3rd-degree black belt in karate. One night it happened, and he heard something land in our backyard right next to the door. He rushed out with a machete nearby and searched for whoever it was. But no one was there. Our backyard had a 7-feet-high cement brick wall surrounding it, so it would have been near impossible for someone bearing LeBron James would be able to run across the backyard and clear the wall in a few seconds that it took my dad to run out there. Rumor has it that other people saw it and described it as a very large man smoking a cigar and running over the rooftops in the barrio.
When I was around 8 years old, I went to a large private school that comprised of kindergartens all the way up to college. The school is called OLOPSC in Marikina, Philippines. In the part of the building I was studying at, there were 2 washrooms, an upstairs and a downstairs. Students were allowed to go to either, but were recommended to go to the one closest to their classroom. The closest bathroom to me was the lower level, and I hated going because the room depended on natural light from the windows for lighting. It was dim at best, and it really just had a creepy vibe. Not exactly sure when it started, but every time I'd go to piss, I would feel someone watching over my back. I would turn around and I would not see anything unusual, but the sensation was there. After about a couple of weeks, the encounters escalated to a point where I could finally see who or what was looking at me in my peripherals. It was a young boy, about 5 years old, wearing a white shirt, blue shorts, blank eyes and facial expression, dark lips and dark hair. His skin was a lifeless grey colour. He would stare at me without breaking contact. I remember what he looked like very vividly. However, when I would turn to face him, he would be gone. This would happen every time I went to the washroom, and I got so scared that I decided I would use the 2nd floor washroom from then on. One day I really had to go piss, but I wasn't able to make it to the 2nd floor washroom. I wet my pants embarrassingly and was sent home for the day. I told my parents I just couldn't hold it. It was a much easier excuse than having to tell them that a little boy is watching me pee in the 1st floor washroom. My older brother, 10 years old at the time, who went to the same school, asked me why I opted to go to the 2nd floor bathroom instead of the one closest to my classroom. This time, I decided to tell my brother the real reason, expecting him to tell me it's all in my head or it's just my imagination. But boy, was I wrong. When I told him it was because every time I went to the 1st floor washroom, I felt like someone was watching me, my brother replied with, "Is it a boy?" and proceeds to describe exactly how the boy looks, down to the way it stared at him. I was completely freaked out when he shared his identical experiences with the ghost. I'm 19 now, and to this day, I have absolutely no explanation for all this. I still have vivid memories of the boy's image, and I have never felt the same eerie feeling from being stared at by that boy. If anyone has had similar experiences, please share. Thank you. Clarita Villanueva, a 17-year-old Filipino girl, had known a life of tragedy. She did not remember her father. She did not know if he had died or had deserted her mother. Her mother was a fortune teller by vocation. The girl was brought up watching her mother holding seances, communicating with the dead, and using clairvoyance to predict to people what they could expect in the future. Her mother took money from people for her services and then laughed at them behind their backs. To her, it was all just a game, a means of making a living by duping unsuspecting and gullible people. When Clarita was 12 years old, her mother died. Since she did not have any immediate family to take her in and care for her, she turned to prostitution for survival. At 18, she moved to Manila with her boyfriend, but found out that he was already married, so she began working as an exotic dancer. The big city was a hiding place, a center of money and vice for her business. But one morning at 2 a.m. on the streets of downtown Manila, Clarita was picked up by the police, who suspected her of being a vagrant. The policeman called for a vehicle and Clarita was taken to the ancient Bilibid prison, used as the city jail. Bilibid has been a prison for over 300 years. It was built by the Spanish and used by the Americans, the Filipinos and the Japanese as a prison and a place of torment. 2 days after Clarita was incarcerated, there struck the strangest phenomenon to ever hit Bilibid prison in its 300-year history. This young woman was bitten severely on her body by unseen and unknown alien entities. She claimed there were two of them, a huge monster-like spirit and a smaller one. They sunk their fangs and teeth deep into her flesh, making deep indentations. They would bite her neck, back, legs and arms simultaneously. Blood flowed, mostly underneath her skin from the bites. The 18-year-old girl screamed in horror and fainted. The guards and medics heard the commotion and came running to the women's division of the prison. The other female inmates pointed to the writhing, tormented girl on a cot. The girl was taken to the prison hospital for observation and treatment, where all the doctors declared they had never seen anything like it. These strange, demonic bitings began to occur daily, baffling all who saw it. Dr. Mariano Lara, the chief medical examiner at the prison, appealed for help through the media and permitted many to view the strange phenomenon. Filipino, Chinese, and American doctors, university professors, and other professionals were called in to analyze the situation. After 3 awful weeks of this torture, a radio reporter came to Bilibid and taped a session while the doctors were violently struggling with Clarita. The reporter immediately released his story on a local radio station just after the 10 o'clock news. The news media soon caught wind of the occurrence and sent more reporters out to investigate. The newspapers, radio stations and magazines found it their kind of story and began to publicize it. Even the cartoonists were soon drawing pictures of the entities from Clarita's descriptions. As the bitings continued day by day, the UPA and other world news services began to report the phenomenon worldwide. This incident made the front page of many newspapers: Switzerland, France, Germany, England, Canada, even the United States. One doctor accused the girl of putting on an act in order only to get publicity. Clarita gazed at the doctor and said, "You will die." He didn't feel anything at the moment, but the following day the doctor expired without even getting sick. He simply died. Fear struck the city when that news was spread about. The girl was not only a harlot, they said. She was also a witch who could speak curses upon human beings and they would die. The chief jailer had a confrontation with the girl. He had kicked her for something she had done wrong while rebelling against him. Clarita looked at the jailer in cold, inhuman hate and said, "You will die." Within 4 days, the man was dead and buried, the second person to fall victim to her curse. Dr. Lara and his medical staff were deeply concerned. They had a prisoner who certainly was not crazy, but who was being wildly attacked by unseen entities and being bitten deeply on all parts of her body by creatures no one else could see. They were afraid that this thing would kill them, as it had the 2 others who dared cross it. It was their responsibility to do something for the girl, yet they had no earthly idea what to do about the situation. It was beyond their medical knowledge. Who were these alien entities? The large one, Clarita said, was a monster in size. He was black and very hairy. He had fangs that came down on each side of his mouth, plus a set of buck teeth all the way around. The doctors verified her description by the teeth marks on her body. Buck teeth solid all the way around the bite, rather than sharp teeth in the front. The smaller entity was almost like a dwarf. He would climb up her body to bite her upper torso. Both of these spirits liked to bite her where there was a lot of flesh, on the back of her leg, the back of her neck, the fleshy part of her upper arms. They would bite deep into her, leaving ugly, painful bruises. Dr. Lara and his assistants called in all sorts of observers, medical doctors, surgeons, psychiatrists and professors from the Far East University and the University of Santo Tomas. They claimed they saw bite marks appear out of nowhere on Clarita's arms. Dr. Lara also described the bite marks as otherworldly because they were too large and round. A human bite is elliptical and seemed to have been made by molars. No one had ever witnessed such strange and demonic behavior, nor did they know any solution to the problem. They all wondered who would be the next victim of her curse. Dr. Lara and his staff sent out word globally, "Come and help us. Please help us." In the end, hopelessness urged them to finally resort to exorcism. Reverend Lester Samral heeded the call.
Because I was a foreigner in the Philippines, I went to the mayor's office and asked permission to see Clarita. He granted me his permission but warned me that several people have been injured by the girl and that 2 had been cursed and were dead. I went with the understanding that I would not sue the government if I was hurt and that I would not complain if mistreated. When I arrived at the prison, the head doctor of 6 physicians, Dr. Lara, was skeptical of this foreign minister, but he finally permitted me to see the girl.
Clarita was brought into a special room where the Reverend was waiting with a large group of news reporters, foreign members of the press, university professors and medical doctors, who had all been invited by Dr. Lara. As Clarita was being led into the room, she looked at them and said nothing. But when she saw Reverend Samral, she screamed violently, "I hate you." That was the beginning of the confrontation. There was a raging battle with the girl blaspheming God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Her eyes were burning coals of fire and full of hate. I commanded the evil spirit to loose her. After a 3-day confrontation with the devil in her, the miracle of God came upon her. She relaxed, smiled, and said, "He's gone," indicating that the thing went out the window. It was late at night when a man waved his hand at the driver and got on the Jeep. The driver wondered why the man chose to stand on the edge and cling on the rails, and asked him why he would not just take a seat. Just as the man was about to answer that the vehicle was full of passengers, he realized it was actually empty. Another tale was that of a girl who got on the Jeepney by herself. All of a sudden, the driver veered away from the regular route into unknown territory. Driving through dark and unpopulated areas, he kept glancing cautiously at the girl over his shoulder. The girl started to fear for her life and womanly dignity, and requested that she be dropped off at her dorm. In time, the Jeepney resumed its regular route, and she was dropped off in front of her building. But before taking off, the driver said,
"Miss, As soon as you get inside, take off your clothes and burn them. Because when I saw your reflection in the rearview mirror, you were headless.
He also said that was the reason he took several unusual turns, because he feared the girl's untimely demise lay in the Jeepney's regular course.
I don't know if it fits the criteria, but I have this creepy experience back when I was a child. So a little bit of context. In the Philippines, there's this thing we call aswang. It's a Filipino folklore pertaining to mostly anything shape-shifting creatures of the dark. These entities prey on the living, from livestock to humans, and they feed off human flesh, specifically kids or babies. We have a term here called napaglaruan, or simply playdad. This term is used when a person or group of people is being disoriented, puzzled, mystified, or simply get lost on an otherwise familiar route. Anyways, this happened to my mom and me way back in 91 to 92 when I'm still around 2 to 3 years old. This is according to her recollection of the events that happened at that time. We lived in the poorer side of the neighborhood. 1 in every 5 houses is made of scrap woods, plywoods, and roof sheets. This is an important detail of the story. One day around noon, we got towards the deeper part of the neighborhood to purchase rice and other daily supplies from one of her friend's store located there. Halfway through her walk, she turns into a corner. My mom, with me clutched in her arms, starts to notice something strange. The surroundings change. It transforms into a place that she's unfamiliar with. The once run-down cheap-looking houses, made up of scraps, turns into one of those old Spanish-styled houses that has marble baluster covered in moss. One look and you can see that those houses have been battered through time. Tall trees aline both sides of the once narrow trail, now transformed into long wide road covered in shade. The once hot summer noon eerily feels like cold wet season. Every now and then, a little breeze makes the trees sway, creating a creepy vibe. Dread slowly creeps in. My mom turns and turns, but everywhere she looks, she only sees old trees and those dreaded old Spanish houses with those creepy moss-covered marble balusters. She instinctively tightened her hold of me, afraid that I may be snatched away from her. My mom continuously walks for what she feels like almost 20 minutes. Then, as my mom is slowly losing her wits, out of nowhere, a tall, well-built man appears and starts walking towards us. As they were about to pass each other, the guy accidentally, or should I say luckily, bumps into my mom, causing her to regain her focus. She frantically grabs onto him and hysterically asks the guy, "Sir, excuse me, I seem to be lost. Can you show me the way out of here?" To which the guy bewilderedly answered, "Yes, ma'am, it's just here," and just points towards my mom's back. Upon turning back, my mom is shocked, relieved, and puzzled, and just plain scared to see that we had just taken 3 steps after turning the corner earlier. When she turns around again, she is scared witless as everything in her surroundings returned to its original appearance. All the houses were made of those familiar cheap-looking scrap materials, and she immediately thanked the guy and swiftly turned around and walked faster than she usually does and goes back. Upon exiting there hurriedly, she goes straight to the house of my older sister's previous daycare teacher at the entrance of a narrow alley. My mother told her the entire experience, and she responded that we may have been played at or napaglaruan. It was then that she learned that there's an open secret that one of the residents there is an aswang. And it's not the first time that this incident happened. Thankfully, we were able to get out of there at one piece. And thank you to the guy that we bumped into. For if not for him, we may not have been here anymore. It's still baffling to me to suddenly appear into an unfamiliar place just by walking without you noticing. Again, I don't know if this experience fits the criteria, but I just want to share our experience here.
This is actually a very popular legend which has been passed from generation to generation, and even featured in TV programs. Teniente Gimo was a real-life lieutenant during the Spanish era in the Philippines. Gimo was known to be the first aswang in the country and originated in Duenas, Iloilo, Philippines. There were many versions of the story, and the famous version was that Teniente Gimo had a daughter named Maria. Maria invited her 2 friends to their house. There were many foods served during the dinner, as if there was a celebration. After eating, Maria and her friends decided to sleep. Before Maria and her friends slept, they swapped personal belongings. Maria borrowed a necklace from one of her friends and wore it to go to sleep. That night, Gimo was targeting Maria's friend who was wearing the necklace. Gimo checked the bedroom and hit the head of the girl who wore the necklace and proceeded to eat her. Then morning came and Gimo realized whom he had eaten. It was actually his daughter. Nobody knows what happened to Maria's friends. There are people who believe that they are the ones who spread the story. It was early November in 2010, and we'd just finished celebrating All Saints' Day here in the Philippines. We lived in a small subdivision, surrounded by kind neighbors, so we didn't really expect things to turn south that fast. It was just me, my brother, my mum, dad, grandfather and cousin, who'd been living in the house for about 6 months, and so far so good. My mum's store was doing great. First time being able to watch Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon. And I just started playing a game when it happened. My cousin told us about the voices she hears at night and the constant banging she feels underneath her bed. We shrugged it off as some nightmare, and days passed until she brought it up again. But this time, she woke up nearby the stairs at 3 a.m. and that actually made my parents a little worried. I was a kid, so I wasn't actually scared. To be honest, I'm actually pretty pumped to experience my first actual paranormal activity. My brother, on the other hand, was quiet for some reason. What my cousin told us the next day actually sent shivers down my spine. She was taking a bath, and when she poured water on her back, it parted ways like someone or something was on her back. Initially, it wasn't that scary, but I was reminded of Shutter, and boy, that scared me to death when we watched it. It was then that my brother admitted that he can see spirits, actually shadow and light figures, and my dad actually experienced participating in an exorcism when he was young. The events that proceeded to unfold are just horrifying thinking about it now that I'm older. We had our first exorcism and it wasn't what I expected it to be. She was just lying on the bed and saying weird stuff. I actually hoped that she'd levitate or rotate her head. She was able to rip a page from the Bible before becoming stable. My brother heard voices of different genders and ages. What's worse is that she had to sleep in our room since hers was cursed or something. She slept below the side where I usually sleep, and in that moment, I've never wanted to sleep as fast in my entire life. The thought of opening your eyes and she's floating above you or just staring at you directly in your face was just terrifying. The next day was kind of tame. My cousin was doing fine and my grandpa just happened to see a lady in a black veil coming down from the stairs into the kitchen, which was just an extension of the house. I was outside that time, as well as my parents and brother, so not the type of news we'd want to hear. The next day was the grand finale, good versus evil, as I watched everything unfold while eating a bowl of noodles. It was the worst she'd ever been, physically, and it looked terrifying. She started doing incantations to which my dumb 10-year-old brain responded with more made-up incantations. I did not take it seriously at all. They decided to cleanse her room, which was even harder to do because of her brother participating in the cleanse and eventually getting possessed too. He looked at one of the images of my grandmother, to which he described the eyes turning black, and that's when he lost control. He was strong, being able to take on my dad and priest's assistant. Eventually, she threw up a black necklace. She looked into a mirror and just said that it was over. They took care of the mirror, and she was brought into church rehab. We didn't realize how many spectators we had outside of our house. We discovered that the owner of the house performed a ritual after the extension. So yeah, we had to move out. I'm glad it's just the house that was haunted. She's doing fine now, and so are we. According to some of our ex-neighbors, they still see figures inside her room when they walk past it.
When I was younger, I lived on a property that used to house a big Spanish-style home in the Philippines, which was split into different houses or sections, and I think the house that I lived on was on the garden section. When I was younger, I've always experienced weird events and weird sightings, for the lack of better words. In the main part of the property, it is commonly known by the town that someone jumped off the balcony to commit suicide, and her ghostly apparitions are known to appear during the nights. But back to my story, I have 3 very vivid experiences about my home. There's probably more if I ask my mother, but these are the ones that occurred to me. 1. I heard my father's footsteps and I ran to greet him as he got home. But he wasn't there, and I was actually all alone. I ended up hiding in the master's bedroom out of fear. I know my father's footsteps. There is a slight rhythm to it with the weight of his feet. Needless to say, 8-year-old me was terrified, but this one is a pretty tame story. 2. During a very terrible storm, I had some cousins over and the lights all turned off. We had one flashlight and lit some candles. A bit after the thunder hit, we heard a ball bouncing upstairs with some running footsteps of a child. I didn't play with any bouncing balls, especially not in the 2nd floor. And my mother also has other stories about hearing this child. Number 3. This is the one that scared me shitless. It was night, and I was sitting by the dining table, just playing games on my laptop while my mother was cooking some dinner. To my left, we had a very huge sliding window with a curtain covering it. By huge, I mean 2 doors sized. I wanted to check on my dog outside, and when I opened the window, I saw a black humanoid figure with no face, no eyes, no mouth, no anything, on all 4s like my dog. It was still, except for its head, which was turning as if it was stretching its head in circles. I knew for sure that this wasn't my dog because we had a light open outside. And needless to say, I was freaked out and I started crying immediately and ran to tell my mother and told her about what I saw. She looked uncomfortable and told me that it was probably just my dog to assure me. I went back to the window to check, which was a ballsy move, but it was gone. Just my golden retriever sitting with his tongue out. I still believe that what I saw that night, it wasn't human and it wasn't my dog, but I don't know what it wanted. I never saw it again. It couldn't have been my dog because my dog has a distinct golden yellow coat that shines in the light.
Of all my memories of my grade school, this one stands out the most. There was this girl who was my classmate in the second grade, named Georgia. She was a sweet and kind girl. Our school was located in a rural area in the southern parts of the Philippines. One day there was a storm and we were told to go home early because our school is located near the river. At that time, my classmate Georgia got washed out by the extreme flowing of the river, and then her body was found after 5 days near the shore. Days after that, her ghost wandered the school, and you could hear her crying, seeking out for help, and at night, the guards reportedly saw her playing inside the room. At that time, I didn't really believe any of that stuff. But then one day, my best friend, who was a close friend of Georgia, comes to me and says she can hear Georgia crying and calling her name. So I say to her, "Nah, it's just someone else messing with you." So we went on a walk to prove to her that it's nothing and it was someone else messing or pranking her. Then, when we reached the back side of our classroom, I immediately hear George's voice crying and calling my name. I looked at the surroundings, but I can't see anyone. It's just me and my best friend, so I look at my best friend because I thought it was her. But as I look at her face, she was frightened, like she had seen a ghost. At the moment that I saw my best friend's face, I knew we both messed up. So I ran away, leaving my best friend behind me, and I was just scared. I just skipped school after that. So yeah, that was it. My best friend and I didn't talk about it ever again.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below. So feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.